Benvenuto, welcome Purespohtin, tervetuloa. Today we discuss with Pirita, Näkkäläjärvi and Oula-Antti Labba how to pass on language, yoik and other oral traditions in the Sami culture. Pirita and Oula-Antti, thank you so much for coming here to share your knowledge. Can you please introduce yourselves to us?
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure. Really nice to join this discussion. It's such an honor. My name is Pirita Näkkäläjärvi. I am from Inari on the Finnish side of Sápmi. And I don't know how to call myself, perhaps a Sami expert. In my civil life, I work in finance sector, but in the spare time, I work with Sami societal matters, and I'm also an elected member of the Sami Parliament here on the Finnish side.
Hello, Korpeäivi. My name is Oula-Antti Labba, and I come also from the Finnish side of Sápmi, and I work as a lawyer. I've been working with Sami and indigenous rights issues for many years, and recently I work in Sami Council, which is an NGO that represents Samis all over the Sami land, Samis that live in Finland, Norway, Sweden and Russia, which are geographically their traditional lands.
And I am Amanda Kauranne. I'm a folk musician and music journalist from Finland, and I know Pirita from a mutual project that we were together, Blood Porn and Propaganda, goddammit, where Pirita was consulting and yoiking in the propaganda section, where we talked of the story of Finland and also how the Sami people have been a part of that, and also as this sad history and also sad nowadays of Finland colonizing Sami people. I would like to know, what should we all know about the Sami people and Sami culture?
A great question, and maybe I'll start by doing exactly the same as Oula-Antti. I'll also speak a bit of Sami language because that's of course important. Nuotte outalkalkan vastidi nuumadde sani samekieli saatte vaikka naamuittanatte saamelacha orrot neljiriikkas nuo Oula-Antti tuossa muittali tai neljiriikka kuovluhla pahtaan sami kuului nuupeilitan kalkkasi muittalit. So just repeating some of the information about the national states and borders coming to the Sami land that Oula-Antti was telling. So that was a bit of a Sami language. But what to know about the Sami people? So one thing to emphasize is that we are an Arctic indigenous people. And by people, we don't mean that we are just a minority or a language minority or a cultural minority, but we are actually a nation, a people with our own history, languages, identity, culture, and so on. So often we are confused as being just one tribe, so to speak, of Finland or Finnish people, but we are actually another people. So here on what is called Finland nowadays, there are at least two nations or two peoples living side by side, especially here in the north. So maybe that's what I want to emphasize.
How about you, Oula-Antti?
Yes, I agree with Pirita. I want to emphasize that Sami are an indigenous, Arctic indigenous people, and Sami traditional livelihoods are reindeer herding and fishing and hunting. And there are many different Sami languages, and geographically Sami traditional lands, they reach from the southern parts of Sweden and Norway from the northern parts of Finland till the Kola Peninsula in the Russian side.
And this is what you call Sápmi, am I right?
Yes, that's Sami land in northern Sami.
The Sami people, also on the Finnish side of Sápmi, you have this parliament. How does the Sami Parliament work together with the Finnish government and also in the other parts of Sápmi?
Yes, the Sami Parliament sounds quite grandioso. It's an extension of the Finnish government in effect, and it doesn't really have a lot of power at all. There is a very limited budget that the Sami Parliament can decide over or decide about, but the significance is more on the symbolic level. And in principle, the Sami Parliament here on the Finnish side, and there are also Sami parliaments in Norway and Sweden, are the official representative of the Sami people in the respective countries. So when the state or the authorities are planning something that has an impact on our culture and our way of life, our languages, our livelihoods, they should consult and negotiate with us. Now, that is a different question whether that actually happens and to what extent. But the Sami Parliament is our official voice in Finland. And it's elected every 4 years. And we've been just 1 year into this term. And there are 21 of us, you can say from all around Finland, mostly here from the north, but also some representatives from the south.
And what is your field in that? I know that you also work with culture issues.
Yes, we also have various committees within the Sami Parliament, and I chair the cultural committee. I actually get to work with the committee that actually has some money, although it's very, very little. I think it's something like 170,000 this year that we divide out to all of the artists and associations and cultural workers on the Finnish side of Sápmi. But nevertheless, a very nice job.
I was wondering if you also want to talk a bit of this situation with the Sami definition, who can vote, because this is something that is happening in the parliament at the moment, or is this something you want to talk when it's decided? How do you want to proceed with this?
Do you want to have a go?
Yes, thank you. Well, Sami definition is in the Sami Parliament Act, and well, there's a long history of the definition in the Sami Parliament Act, and originally the purpose was that the so-called Sami definition is based solely on the language criteria, so that at least a person, or at least one of his or her parents or grandparents, speak Sami as a mother tongue. But when the Sami Parliament Act was amended, there came also other criteria which were very loose, and actually the interpretation of the criteria has been problematic, and it has actually 2 years ago, United Nations Human Rights Committee found out that Finland had violated this United Nations Civil and Political Rights Convention, and this was because the Supreme Administrative Court interpreted the Sami definition in its own way, and kind of led to the electoral register of Sami Parliament persons that the Sami Parliament didn't accept, or Sami Parliament kind of made decisions that those persons didn't fulfill the criteria. But now there is has been a amending of the Sami Parliament Act going on again this year, and now the proposal is out, and maybe Pirita can tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is the third time in a row that this amendment is being attempted, and we really hope that it goes through this time. And I was sitting in the working group that actually made the amendment, or the proposed amendment, and we tried to structure it so that it could be acceptable to the Sami Parliament, and in a way that it could actually solve the problems and rectify the human rights violation that is ongoing in Finland with regards to this issue. And it's a very serious matter. Finland wants to be a member of the UN Human Rights, what is it called, Council?
Yes, Human Rights Council.
In 2022 to 24. And in our opinion, it's quite difficult to justify the membership if there is an ongoing human rights violation against the civil and political rights agreement with regards to the Sami issues here in Finland. So let's hope that this time we can rectify this, and then we can all move forward to the future.
Exactly. One part of the Sami culture that maybe many people know is yoik. Would you like to tell about that a bit?
Yoik is one of our traditional forms of vocal music tradition. There are also some other forms of yoik which are called differently within the different Sami language groups, but yoik is typical to our language group. And it raises a lot of feelings because since I was a child, I have been yoiking, or perhaps I can say I've been imitating what kind of new yoik artists, pop artists have been doing on tapes and CDs. And then there is also the yoik tradition that in many places and in many families, many areas has almost disappeared. And in some branches of my family that has happened, perhaps due to the impact of the Christian religion and also due to colonization, the tradition has been lost. In some other branches of my family, it's still alive, but I don't consider myself a traditional yoiker. I'd love to be, but I think that having brought up with also Western music, it's really hard to find the traditional expression. And also because yoik has so many other meanings than just being music. And many of those meanings have been lost because the tradition is not kept alive anymore. But anyway, yoik is nowadays one of the main symbols of Sami culture. And it's something that binds us together, but it's in a different way than in the old times. So nowadays it's artists who bring yoik to the stage, to the radio, to CDs, to Spotify, wherever. And we listen to all of those songs and kind of the modern versions of yoik. And they have a strong influence on our feeling of togetherness, on our identity and our culture.
Could I also say or suggest that this kind of Sami revival, the fact that maybe in the 60s and 70s we started to know more about the Sami culture, it has also happened through art and language and poetry and yoik, of course. Yes,
yoik is just like any form of art, and nowadays yoik to some extent is also art. In the old days, it probably was more of a tool of communication and so on. But now that it's also one of our art forms, it is a really good way of reaching people's hearts and feelings. And to a Sami person listening to yoik, it's a very special feeling. it's like a connection also to the old nature-based religion that has disappeared due to colonization and Christian religion. And sometimes that has happened in a very violent way. So it's not a pretty history what has happened to our culture, our religion, our music tradition, and so on. But through yoik, through listening to yoik, and through also trying to yoik, you feel that connection to some of kind of very deep meanings of the culture. So it's a very special thing.
Today we talk also about the language, because Premio Ostana is based on these minority languages. And how are the language, music, and politics tied together in the Sami community?
Well, you could say that all the elements of the Sami culture are kind of tied together. And a lot of Sami people are very skilled at many things. So it's quite fairly typical to our culture that people do a lot of things and know a lot of things. And from, at least from my point of view, I don't make a difference between the different things. They're kind of all part of the same. And I think what is quite common to people of our generation is that although we've been studying and getting degrees, and we might be having nice careers in the so-called Western world, we feel obliged to do something for the Sami culture and the languages and whatever it is. And people also make their life decisions based on how they can contribute to their culture and how they can give back in a way. And everything is kind of related to everything, right?
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, nowadays I can see that Sami music is also an important carrier of a Sami language, and I see that, for example, especially regarding the minority languages within Sami language groups, I think, especially like in, let's say, South Sami, Ukmi Sami, Anar Sami, and Skolt Sami, that I think music has been one carrier nowadays of a language.
And have I understood correctly that also these traditional livelihoods of reindeer herding and also this tuotji, like handicraft, or how would you call that, they are also tied to the language and how the language lives on?
Yeah, the traditional livelihoods are, you could say, kind of natural domains to use the Sami languages. And vice versa, the Sami languages carry the culture. So there is an interdependency. And many times we are using the future of the Sami languages as one of the arguments for protecting our land and protecting that our traditional livelihoods can actually operate on those lands. And sometimes that connection is lost. People don't understand, like, what do livelihoods have to do with languages? But for us, there is a direct connection because it's the traditional environment where you use the language and where also the next generations learn it by doing, and there's a lot of special vocabulary, for example, tied to reindeer herding or fishing or handicraft or so on. So there is a very close connection.
Oula-Antti, would you like to tell what is the history and the present situation of Sami languages now in the Finnish part of Sápmi?
Well, I can say that especially in early 20th century, when Finland became independent, and in the mid 20th century, the Sami faced plenty of discrimination, and especially the authorities, and also, how do I say, in boarding schools there was discrimination. Samis were discriminated by the majority, and that caused that Sami language was in a weak situation, and especially in some parts of the Sami home region, the language, we can say that at least there became one generation who didn't learn the language. But I think that especially in the 80s, the revitalizing of the Sami languages became strong, and for example, if we look from the point of view of the minority languages in the Finnish part of Sapmi, like Anar Sapmi and Skol Sapmi, then I think one this kind of essential element on revitalizing languages has been this kind of language nest system. And well, if I look from the legal point of view, then I think that one kind of key element was in the 90s when Finland recognized in its constitutions the Sami people's right to maintain and develop their language and culture, and Finland also ratified these international human rights conventions, European Council's framework conventions, which were kind of their purpose was to protect minority languages. So I think in legal level, those kind of strengthened the position of Sami language, and also a separate Sami Language Act came to force in the early 1900s and was amended in the early 2000s. But of course, there is still much work to do, and I think that in many ways the obligations to kind of obligations for authorities to protect Sami language, it should be stronger, and also the legal part should be stronger than it is now. So there is still work to do. There has been, of course, good progress, but I think also in the language level there is still work to do.
And if we think of now Finland, there's a lot of Sami people also here in the south, in the bigger cities, and you should be able to operate on your mother tongue, but maybe it's not happening in the same way all over the country. What do you think of this?
Well, the language rights are different depending on where you live geographically. So for children, the subjective right to daycare in their mother tongue, that's enforced in the whole country. And that enables some kids to get daycare and kind of early, early education in Sami language if they have Sami as their mother tongue. But then the stronger language rights are only enforced here in the north, in the official Sami region. So it's different depending on where you live.
Yes. Pirita, would you like to tell a bit about your relationship with yoik? You mentioned it a bit earlier, but do you want to tell a bit more?
Yes. What else could I add? As a child and as a teenager, music was really a big part of my life, and I dedicated all of my free time, spare time to music and learning instruments, and we had a couple of groups and later a duo, and we performed Sami music, also including kind of this new yoik, or perhaps you can call it that, and did a lot of concerts and so on. And it was my dream to study music, but then perhaps, I don't know what was the reason, but perhaps there wasn't enough drive or enough skill or whatever at that time to
or
go
enough support.
Or enough support. I did apply to go to the Sibelius Academy, but I didn't make it. I was on the fifth place in the waiting list, and probably if I had continued to try to get in, perhaps I would have got in, and perhaps we would have studied together. But so I embarked on a career in business and in media communications. But of course, you know, in Sami life, everything is related to everything, and everything belongs together. So Sami music and yoik continue to be part of my life in a way that I listen to the music, and I think about yoik a lot, and I read everything that I find, and I always listen to the new artists, and I also try to learn yoiking myself and so on. And it remains a dream one day perhaps to study music and dig a bit deeper into the yoik tradition. And in recent years, I've been getting really interested in the effect of colonialism on yoik and all the different meanings that there are to our yoik tradition, because it's not just music, it's also a form of communication, it's social glue, it's our medicine, it's even our law, and it's a form of literature as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we even ourselves have forgotten a little bit, and there's a lot of work to take the yoik back and all of its meanings back. And I'm really interested in looking at yoik through the concept of cultural appropriation, because unfortunately it happens that yoik is used well, not used, but stolen from us in different formats. And I don't think that there's a lot of research into that. And that's my dream, to work with that. So fingers crossed, maybe someday.
And a really important topic to research. Also, I feel that in Finland at the moment, we're in this kind of situation where the Finnish people, such as myself, we are the oppressors at this situation, and now I feel that the Sami people who are the oppressed, you have to teach to us who are the oppressors, and I feel like this causes a lot of friction as well, and it's not right that you have to take also the burden of teaching the oppressors about your culture and what would be the right thing to do. But what kind of change would you like to see during your lifetime? And what would be a good way of collaborating with the Sami people and with the Sami culture in a respectful and sustainable way?
Oh, there are so many things where even to start. Well, maybe a couple of things. Of course, we would really love this amendment of the Sami Parliament Act to go through, so we could get this human rights violation sorted and we could move on. But another really important thing would be to increase awareness and information about the Sami in the Finnish society and also in the other Nordic and Russian societies where Sami live. And what you said about the oppressed teaching the oppressors, it's not any single person's fault that there is not enough information about the Sami, for example, in Finland. Although in Finland there is a highly acclaimed and celebrated school system, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world. But for some reason, it doesn't have any ability to teach about the Sami. So it's a structural problem. It's not any individual's fault, but many of the structures in our society have been built based on the Finnish culture and the Finnish worldview and Finnish language. And I think the list is endless. It's not only school, but what else could we mention?
Well, I can also, of course, mention that Finland should finally ratify the International Convention ILO 169, which recognized indigenous people's rights, and especially Finland should recognize the Sami people's rights to their traditional lands and natural resources and traditional livelihoods, and of course implement the United Nations Declaration on the rights of the indigenous peoples. So I think that would be a great start.
Yeah, and these are things that have been, under progress for over 25, 15 years. So it's not time to make any more new research or new studies or say that we need more information, because there's a lot of research and a lot of studies about the Sami culture and legal rights and so on. It's time to implement all of those things.
Exactly. Now I would just say I was thinking of this collaboration. Is there a good way to do this? I mean, I think we have to start from the real basic things in order to truly start collaboration. But I was thinking if there are any good examples of that already, or are there any good examples of collaboration yet?
There are, and well, the starting point is that we are a very small people, only 10,000 in Finland, and Finland is about 5.5 million people. So we are a very small minority and indigenous people. So we need allies, and we need cooperation with the majority population and with different kinds of people. And luckily there are really good examples, and I think the best examples are always when, for example, take some bands like Solju. There are Sami musicians, very skilled yoikers, singers, and then Finnish musicians coming together and collaborating and creating something completely new. That's the best thing. If you want to do something and be inspired by the Sami culture, cooperate and collaborate with the Sami. Because that also kind of engages the Sami artists or Sami researchers or whoever they are, and is a way to create something new and bring new kinds of perspectives into light. So luckily there are good examples, and we hope to see more, not only in music, but in other fields as well.
And how do you see the future of Sami language and culture?
Well, we have to be hopeful. Although the Sami languages here on the Finnish side, all three Sami languages are endangered, and the two minority languages are really severely endangered, there is still hope. And that's because of the younger generations wanting to really contribute to their culture and make sure that it's kept alive. And for us, the central value is traditions. I think, well, maybe it's too big a statement to say that we are one of the only people in the world who place a lot of value in traditions. Probably a lot of indigenous peoples have the same thing, and some minorities as well. But at least kind of the typical Western cultures, it's all about so-called development and new things and one's own identity and building your identity and kind of personal brand. But for us, it's really important to keep the traditions alive. And it's really a source of pride if you know many of the traditions and are able to take them to the next generations. And of course, along the way, the traditions change, because that is a way to, keep them alive. So a lot of the Sami traditions have been adapted to the changing world, and that's the only way to keep them alive. So we have to be hopeful. Of course, there are day-to-day struggles, and some of the issues, like we mentioned, have been going on for decades. But little by little, we're making progress.
And what advice would you give to other minority groups, other minority languages, how to get organized? Not everywhere is it as organized as in Sápmi, I feel.
Oh, that's a really hard question. We're not really language experts as such, but there has to be the commitment from your own group. It's really important, and that willingness to make sure that you keep your language alive. But then, of course, a lot of structural support and allies and official support is needed. So it makes sense to try and institutionalize things like the language nest concept that we mentioned, and trying to get legal protection and so on. But I guess it's a combination of those in a way.
Yes, I completely agree. And of course, there are already many different kind of, especially in indigenous language, where there have been many different kind of innovations, like the language nest system, which has been essential in revitalizing languages, but of course also important is to support those who speak the language as mother tongue, and so that they have good possibilities and practices to maintain their language and carry it on.
Yeah, and maybe as a former head of the Sami language broadcasting here on the Finnish side, I should mention the importance of media. And it doesn't have to be a national media where you have content and broadcasting or writing in a particular language, but even smaller projects like magazines or newspapers that are published maybe even 4 times a year can do a lot, because it's important that the languages are visible and you can read them and you can hear them, and if you're lucky, maybe you can have TV news. Like on the Finnish side, we have twice a day TV news in Sami language on weekdays. So media is really important as well. And also because when you are making news and telling stories, you always have to come up with new words to describe new things. Then the media is a way to also familiarize people with those new terms and words. So there is a lot of power in media in language revitalization as well.
Yes, and I can just add that also, as we have talked before, then art is also an important form of nowadays on carrying the languages. And one form of recent language carrying are the movies, and movies made by, for example, indigenous peoples, minority language groups, or then movies which are dubbed kind of to indigenous languages or other minority languages. So there are kind of modern day innovations what are very useful in a way of maintaining and carrying languages on.
Today we have used English because it's sort of a meeting point for us. It's not an oppressing language, I hope, and also to kind of gather people from all over the world to learn more about the Sami people, Sami languages, Sami rights. What would be, or what are essential words or phrases in the Sami culture, and why? And are there some words that we could all learn and take home with us?
Oh, a difficult question. Well, maybe it's nice to learn how to say, well, greet when you meet someone in Sami language. So, "Huomenta päivä," you say when you meet someone. "Hyvää päivää" in Finnish. So what would that be in English? I pause to think. "Have a good day." Well, it's not, that's literally the meaning, but not sure how. Well, it's more like when you meet someone and you ask in English, "How are you?" So that's kind of "Huomenta päivä."
Huomenta päivä.
What else?
Well, there are kind of many words, like these are more like this kind of starting point, beginners level, but for example, Sami language is very rich on describing the snow conditions, and I could have hundreds of words to teach, and in a way it's a bit if we look in future, it's important to kind of maintain these words, because we have plenty of threats like climate change, which can affect that, for example, to our language, and it might even change our language in future radically. But sorry, I don't have any one example word what to teach.
Maybe I can teach a word that I have learned from Pirita. I think it's this kiihtu, which means thank you, and takka in the Inari Sami, and spasep in Skolt Sami. Yeah, now I got a bit lost in my own.
Never mind.
Just this kind of basic phrase that now when summer is coming, then you can say pori keesi. It means that have a nice summer.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, kiihtu, kiitos, grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you, kiitos.